The premier event for infection prevention and control is coming to San Antonio this June. APIC's annual conference brings you the latest research, innovative products, and practical knowledge to help you prevent infection. From inspiring keynotes to thought-provoking panel discussions, APIC 24 curates an extraordinary platform for knowledge exchange. Meet IPs from around the world who face the same daily challenges as you. If you work in infection prevention and control, you don't want to miss this event. Learn more and register to join us in person or virtually at annual.apic.org.
You're listening to the 5-Second Rule, brought to you by APIC, the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology. Together with our nearly 16,000 members, we strive to create a safer world through the prevention of infection. Join us while we talk to infection preventionists and other experts to learn the truth about some common myths related to the risk of infection and to get tips to keep yourself and the people around you safe from infection. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the 5-Second Rule. I am Sylvia Quevedo, and I have a new guest host. Hannah is off today, but I'm thrilled to be with Marie H. Wilson, who is the Manager of Infection Prevention and Control at Methodist Dallas. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sylvia. I'm excited to be a part of today's episode.
Well, glad to have you here as the guest host. Today's episode is, why is our show called the 5-Second Rule? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, why did they come up with that? So do you have any idea, Marie, why we're called the 5-Second Rule?
I know it's one of these concepts that we've grown up with, right? It's okay. It's only been on the ground for 5 seconds, but as infection preventionists and those that are interested in infection prevention, we know that those little things can actually be really harmful in the end with the susceptible host of these sorts of things. So I'm excited to dig deeper.
Exactly. I'm gonna quote the Urban Dictionary. Okay, so we're all familiar with Urban Dictionary. Urban Dictionary defines it as an unwritten law dictating that if a food or other consumable item is dropped onto the floor, it may be picked up and eaten within 5 seconds. The reasoning behind this is that dirt and germs take 6 seconds to transfer from one surface to another. What do you think about that, Marie?
Well, I think it largely depends, and I love that they call it a law, right? A law is something
an unwritten law.
Is a truth. Yeah, an unwritten law. So that could certainly be misinterpreted.
We have a great guest today. Her name is Nicole Nomides, and she's the Manager of Infection Prevention and Epidemiology at University of Michigan Medicine in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the 5-Second Rule show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about this unwritten law that says that germs only take 6 seconds to transfer from one surface to another.
Well, I'm not sure where that 6 seconds really comes from, but I do know that the first sort of mention of anything like a 5-second rule came from the 13th century with Genghis Khan.
Wow.
He actually, during his reign, he would have these big banquets, and anytime food would fall on the ground, he would say, well, it is safe to eat no matter how long it's on the ground because I said so. And it was the Khan rule. So it's almost like a 5-second rule, but that was, I think, more of his ego, and certainly there was no understanding of germ theory or, transmission of organisms or anything like that. But it's kind of interesting to say that, this is something that's been around for a really long time, that it's okay to pick up things off the ground and eat them.
Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Marie, did you know that?
No, I didn't. And I think that's so funny. Genghis Khan, this rule is a con.
It is a con. So if you're listening,
it's a con rule. I like that, Nicole. I've never heard that.
That's
I wonder if it possibly gained foothold in food scarcity at the times and not wanting to be wasteful. But what do you understand about that, Nicole, and like how it gained foothold?
Well, I think there has always been like a misunderstanding about germs and what they are, and because we can't see them, we're not worried about them. And I'm sure that sort of human behavior of, not worrying about things you can't see has got to be where this has come from. And, if you see something, it doesn't look bad, it doesn't look rotten, it doesn't look, dirty, then it's okay.
Yeah.
And we know that that's not...
What could the harm be? Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We know that that's not true. So talk to us a little bit about what kinds of surfaces. So first of all, we want to say to everyone, and obviously our infection prevention listeners know this, but you really shouldn't be picking up food from the floor and from the ground, but a lot depends on the type of surface, correct? Mm-hmm. And frankly, there are differences among microbes in terms of how long they can live on a surface. So maybe both Nicole and Marie can shed a little light on what we're talking about and help us understand from the public's perspective as well as our healthcare worker listeners on the importance of understanding the surface and the different microbes.
So I think, Nicole, as we look to you as our expert on answering that, it's important for us to differentiate or explain what microbes or organisms we're talking about, right? We're talking about bacteria, we talk about viruses, and we talk about fungi, which actually we have another episode on. But how do those organisms and others impact us when they're on surfaces that we pick up and possibly put in our mouth by following the 5-second rule?
Absolutely. Well, we know that there are germs basically covering every surface everywhere. But the question is, are these germs that are on the ground, on surfaces, are they germs that are pathogenic that will potentially make us sick? And, as an infection preventionist, we are constantly doing something called a risk assessment. We live by risk assessments. So basically what that means is that we're always looking at certain practices and weighing what are the associated risks of doing that practice, risks of infection, versus the benefits of doing that practice. So really, when you are dropping something on the ground, you almost have to do like a mini risk assessment to say, what is the risk of me picking up a germ that's going to make me sick versus how much I really want to eat this snack, right? And there are lots of factors that play into that for sure. So what exactly was the item that was dropped can be a factor. So, comparing sort of a dry, smooth surface item like a pretzel would certainly pick up a different amount of germs than, say, a wet, gooey piece of chocolate, right? The environment of where you drop that item can be a factor as well. So, maybe you're eating jelly beans sitting in your office and you drop a jelly bean under your desk. And I'm not admitting to anything, but this may be a real scenario that has happened. It might be dusty under there, but how many germs are really, on the floor under your desk in your office versus if you drop something in a public restroom next to the toilet where there could potentially be body fluids, and organisms that could really make you sick. So certainly I think, the item that you drop, the environment where you drop, the surface where it's dropped. So if it is, say, your kitchen where that you just disinfected, you just mopped with bleach, you just cleaned your floor this morning, and that there hasn't been a lot of traffic coming in and out of your kitchen, would be different, certainly different, than, say, you're outside on the sidewalk where there could be bird droppings and things like that on the sidewalk.
Got it.
Another factor that plays into a lot of things related to infection prevention that we're always thinking about is the patient, the person who's eating this item that gets dropped. Is it someone who is potentially immunocompromised, or someone, an older person or a baby, or someone who may be more susceptible to infections versus, a healthy person? So there are lots of different factors, I think. So there's a lot to think about how much you really want to eat that thing when you drop it.
Well, and Nicole, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a really important factor to keep in mind when we're talking about the 5-second rule or these concepts of it's okay to touch that or eat that or keep using this is the chain of infection, which for those that might not be familiar, these are links in a chain that all have to connect in order for an organism to cause an infection. So going all the way from where did that organism originate, in this case perhaps the floor as the reservoir, how did it get lifted off the floor, perhaps in our food, and then how did it get exposed to the susceptible host by eating it. You touch on a fun part of this is we've talked about 5-second rule so far. We've talked about it applied to food, but there are so many other things that fall on the ground. And I love that you brought up the bathroom, because I don't know about you, but how many times have y'all been in a public restroom and heard a phone fall on the floor?
Yeah.
And it's like, what do you do after you pick up that phone? Do you bring it up to your ear and your mouth to use it again, or do you start texting with your hands? What will those hands go touch? And it's not just applying this concept to food, but other things that fall on the floor. When do we need to clean them? When do we need to break the chain of infection?
Good point, Marie. You do. Yeah, I find that a lot of people feel it necessary to talk on their phone while they're in the stall. So yeah, that's a whole other episode, I would say. But you do bring up, we're not just talking about food, but I'm thinking just, a quick question here. What's dirtier, your kitchen floor or a public doorknob?
Well, I think that's really hard to say, because first and foremost, we don't know. You never really know, because like we said before, these are microscopic organisms that you can't see. But certainly I would expect a floor to probably have germs that are more environmental in origin, that things that probably aren't necessarily going to make you sick. Whereas a doorknob, other people are touching with their hands and touching other things that other people touch with their hands as well. You're touching with your hands. And certainly, your hands then go to your face and your mouth and your nose and your eyes and your food. And so there is certainly, that opportunity for, the route of transmission for sure. And that's really, as we said, how bacteria and viruses are transmitted from one person to the next is certainly your hands. So you may not necessarily touch your face to your bottoms of your shoes that are walking around on the ground, but certainly your hands are definitely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the healthcare environment. You all are working in large medical centers. You collaborate, interact, educate with other healthcare workers. Can we speak a little bit about just that notion of not just what you're touching, but the importance of understanding the different microbes, whether it's a bacteria, fungi, or a virus, how long they're living on surfaces? I've heard some estimates that, for example, Candida auris, this highly resistant, dangerous Candida species, can live on surfaces for weeks, as opposed to, say, an HIV virus that on dried blood on a surface might last maybe 6 days. Can you speak a little bit to that, Nicole or Marie? Help us understand, especially for our healthcare worker colleagues, why it's so important to understand that, and the importance of cleaning and the different types of disinfectants that kill these organisms in high-risk areas.
Absolutely. There's lots more to even think about in healthcare, because we're dealing with, patients that a patient population that can be even more susceptible to infection. And so it is even more important to think about, that they could be immunocompromised. They have indwelling devices. They could be on antibiotics that puts them at higher risk of getting other types of infections, because their normal biology is kind of mixed up and different. And as you say, many of these organisms can survive on surfaces for, days to weeks to even months sometimes. And it's really important to ensure that our environment is clean, our equipment and our instruments are as clean as possible, and of course the hands of those healthcare workers that are touching those items and then touching patients, where they could potentially transmit these organisms onto the patients and cause infections. So we spend an enormous amount of time as infection preventionists looking at these practices of, how things are disinfected, that the appropriate products are used to disinfect, that the appropriate practices by, our staff that are cleaning these items and cleaning their hands are doing it appropriately for the right amount of time, for sure we spend a lot of time working on that for, all the time.
I tell everybody that my profession hinges on getting people to wash their hands.
Mm-hmm.
When you break it down to something so simple,
really, yeah.
That's what it is. And I think an important note to clarify for our audience that Nicole touched on is that the reason why patients in the hospital or patients in long-term care or skilled nursing facilities, these different type of healthcare settings, are at an increased risk for infection is because their immune system is lessened, it's weakened, just by the nature of some of the care that we provide that is essential. So having, Nicole mentioned indwelling devices like an IV in your arm or in your neck, or, a urinary catheter in your bladder that's draining your urine. What happens there is we've created a man-made break in a very essential component of your immune system, which is your skin. And so when we talk about the 5-second rule being risky, it's because we're taking something that dropped on a contaminated surface, so a dirty surface as far as we know, and we've picked it up and we've put it directly into our mouth, so directly into our body. And the 5-second rule is also dangerous in the hospital because if we pick that syringe up off the ground and connect it to the IV, that we then, push medication through directly into your bloodstream, that could have been us that introduced that germ right there. Because of the break in your skin, that the protection that is most important for all of us that we've broken. And so it's important for us to note that just by being in the hospital, it's not like you walk through the door and bam, your immune system is weakened, but you're threatened with all new sorts of organisms that you might not have been otherwise. But also, because of some of the care we give, just by nature, your skin is going to be broken down, and that's important to make sure we protect it by protecting the environment.
Nicole, any more thoughts on that? Or share with us also, we've heard there's bacteria naturally living on our skin.
Absolutely. And I think that's why, hand hygiene is so important.
Yeah.
Because, really, in a way, like you said, that doorknob can really be more dangerous to a person as far as infection risk than the floor, because that's really where those organisms are congregating because others are touching it so much. Whereas on the floor, unless there really is any pathogens there, it's probably going to just be environmental sort of bugs.
And
so bugs that we're exposed to any other time of day, any other time of year. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You're mentioning certain times of year. Should we be more concerned? Is that something that is a factor? Seasonal variation?
Well, we're certainly in flu season right now.
Yeah. We're in flu season right now, and it can swing the other way, too, in the summer when we're having picnics and we're out eating food in warm environments that we're maybe not keeping cold. Food safety is very important when it comes to applying that 5-second rule, making sure we've cleaned our food appropriately before eating and we've kept it separate so that our meats aren't touching our fresh fruits and vegetables that won't be cooked.
I don't think I've ever thought of that. I know the mayo thing is a big deal at picnics, but meat not touching fresh vegetables, is that what you said, Nicole?
Yeah, fresh fruits and vegetables. You want to keep your raw meat away from your fresh fruits and vegetables.
I'll have to remember that.
Theoretically, you're going to cook your raw meat. So you might you hopefully cook it to the right temperature and cook out the organisms that could make you sick in raw meat.
Nicole?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you would agree with that. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we talk about the kitchen, if you drop something on the floor, could it be more dangerous to drop something on the counter where you may have just had raw meat? Might be more dangerous than dropping something on the floor, if you think about it, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're really talking about what may be obvious to some, but to others not so much, the importance of understanding the risk of the environment, the importance of the different microbes that live for different times on different surfaces. We say this almost every episode. It's critical that we conduct hand hygiene and good hand hygiene protocols if you're in a healthcare setting. Here on the 5-second rule, we love to ask our guests, Marie, I don't know if you're aware, but we typically ask all of our guests what bugs them about this issue. So, Nicole, can you share with us what's bugging you about this notion of the 5-second rule?
I think what bugs me is that you're never sure. And you could eat off the floor all day long and never, ever get sick, and it might not ever matter, but then there could be that one time you could pick up a tiny bit of norovirus or something that could really, really make you sick. So, it's kind of like a gamble. You don't really know. And so it's hard to get someone to understand something that, they may never really see. That's what's frustrating, I think.
Marie, as our guest host, what bugs you about this issue?
I'll actually build off of what Nicole said, is in the not being sure, not entirely knowing. One person could pick something off the floor and it wouldn't make them sick, but another person, because they are immunocompromised or just have a different immune system in general, could become sick. And so out of the protection of everyone, what is the risk? You have to be looking at it not just from yourself, but those that you might be feeding.
I absolutely agree.
All right. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today on APIC's 5-Second Rule podcast. You've given us a great reason for the name behind our podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to speak with you today.
And I want to thank Marie Wilson for serving as guest host. And be sure to check out more information at www.apic.org.
Thanks for listening to the 5-Second Rule, produced by the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology staff, including Hannah Andrews, Sylvia Covedo, and the APIC Communications Committee, in partnership with Human Factor. Audio tech is Blake Alphin.